What's up, Hope Church? We are so glad that you are here. We're going to get right into it today, man. Just excited to have you with us. You've picked a great season to journey along with us. It is our fall launch, and so for many of you that have been gone this summer, welcome back to Hope Church. Glad that you're here. We've missed you while you've been gone. And we're also kicking off a brand new teaching series called Friend of Sinners, as Alex just said. And I want to be totally upfront and honest with you today. If you are somebody that's like uber religious, somebody like uber spiritual, somebody that kind of thinks they have it all figured out, then I'm going to tell you, you're going to be highly offended throughout this series. And so I just want to let you know, over the next 5 weeks, we're going to offend some people. We're going to cast some vision as a church. And we are ultimately going to introduce people to the hope that Jesus offers. And we believe their lives are going to be forever impacted and changed. And so we are so glad that you are here. Again, if you're our guest with us, thank you so much for journeying with us. I often wonder what it must be like to be a guest coming to church for the first time. I grew up as a church kid. I've been in church pretty much since the day that I was born. And I think sometimes we take for granted just how uncomfortable it must be to come to church for the very first time. Where do I park? Where do I go? Where do I sit? Where do I stand? You kind of have that Ricky Bobby moment. What do I do with my hands? Am I supposed to raise them? Am I supposed to do something with them, right? And so our prayer is that you wouldn't feel uncomfortable anymore today. I'm sure that you already have. But we're just glad that you're here. We're glad that you've chosen to journey along with us in this season. If you're at home watching this through our app or online, we're just so glad that you've chosen to be with us, to tune in. Maybe you're in Mebane. Many of you probably know that we announced that we're going to be launching a second campus in Mebane in 2019. And so we have a lot of people from the Mebane area that are really, really excited about what God's doing over there. A lot of people tuning in, a lot of web traffic and media traffic that's picked up in that area, and we're excited about that. And so Mebane people, welcome as well. Again, if you're a guest with us, again, I don't take for granted just how uncomfortable it may feel for you. Maybe you're here and you attend church regularly at Hope Church, and you came out and your pastor was wearing a shirt that says sinner across the front, and that makes you really uncomfortable today, right? And so here's what I want for us. I want for our guests today, the people who don't normally attend church here, ones that are just coming in today, maybe checking us out. Maybe they're skeptical about church. Maybe they're wondering if all this is for real. Maybe they got a wall up to people who claim to follow Jesus, right? I want you to feel extremely comfortable today, and I want everyone who calls Hope Church home to feel a little bit uncomfortable today. I want you to be uncomfortable today. I want those of you who call yourself a follower of Jesus, those of you who claim Hope Church to be your home church, I want you to be a little bit uncomfortable today, because I think being uncomfortable is actually a really good thing for us. Being uncomfortable sometimes shakes us loose of some things. It recalibrates us. It refocuses us. So often what I've discovered is that my comfort often comes at the expense of somebody else's discomfort. You realize that, right? And I'm perfectly okay so often with being comfortable as long as I'm not the one being uncomfortable. And so today what I want us to do is I want us to get uncomfortable so at your expense somebody else can be comfortable today. Does that make sense for you, right? And so I want us today as a church to really just get into some issues today that make us a little uncomfortable. And so I was thinking this week about some things in life that I'm comfortable with doing, but I'm uncomfortable with you doing, okay? I want you to think about what are some things in life that you are comfortable with doing, but you're uncomfortable with somebody else doing the same thing. And so I was thinking back about 10 years ago. Me and Becky didn't have any kids then. Our oldest son, Brogan, just turned 10 at the end of June. And back before we had kids, I was perfectly comfortable with watching your kid. Like, you want to have a night off, a date night, we want to get a kid fixed. I was perfectly okay with watching your kid. Then we had our first child, right? And people would say, hey, why don't you guys go out for a night? We'll watch your kid. And I was like, oh, you ain't watching my kid. I'm not comfortable with you watching my kid, right? And you remember this as first-time parents. I don't know you. You might be like some serial baby killer. I don't know nothing about you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know what happens in your home. I don't know what goes on with you. Like I'm comfortable with my ability to watch your kid. I don't know if I'm comfortable with your ability to watch my kid, right? Right? How about money, right? Take money, for instance. I feel like over the years, we've been very trustworthy with money, so I feel like we're perfectly comfortable. If you wanted to come to me after the service and say, Tad, I need some help with my money, I need some help with budgeting, I need some help with these things, so you give me some help. Oh, great, I can help you with that. I'm perfectly comfortable with helping you with your money. I don't know if I'm comfortable with you helping me with my money. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. After the service, I'm perfectly comfortable with you coming up to me and telling me all of your life's business, everything that's happening. I don't know if I'm comfortable telling you everything that's happening in my life right now, right? I don't know. Think about your own self for just a second. I am perfectly comfortable in my ability to text and drive. I am just not comfortable in your ability to do so, right? Can we just be honest? There have been times in my life when I've about run off the road. about moving cars, hit a mailbox, taking people out, right? And I will pull up beside somebody on the interstate or the road that's texting and driving, and I will give them the look of death. Like, how can you do that, right? You ever done anything like that? Have you ever looked at somebody else who does the exact same thing that you do, and you're comfortable with yourself, but you're uncomfortable with their ability to do the exact same task? Now, here's the interesting part. I have passed people from Hope Church while I've been texting and driving who have sent me a text message while driving to tell me to stop texting and driving. I've never understood that, right? Some of you in this room know who you are. You've done that before. But here's the reality, is that my issue with texting and driving is a bigger deal than I'm willing to admit. And if I take my eyes off the road for just a second, I can not only just destroy my life, but I could also destroy somebody else's life as well. And see, this is really where it starts to hit home for us today. Because here's what I've discovered in my own life, is that I am perfectly comfortable with some things in my life that I've gotten comfortable with, but I'm really good at spotting out the things in other people's lives that make me really uncomfortable. I'm really good at noticing things in people's lives that make me kind of uncomfortable, make me a little queasy, and I'm really good at pointing their things out, all the while ignoring all the things in my own life, right? It's so easy for us to become comfortable with ourselves, with our issues, with our circumstances, and even with our sins, but we are so often uncomfortable with the sins of somebody else, right? Let me tell you something. The fastest way to wreck my life or to wreck somebody else's life is to take the focus off of my sin and my issue and put my focus on somebody else's sin and somebody else's issue. It's the fastest way to destroy me and destroy someone around me. One thing I've always loved about Hope Church, is that we are a church that has truly embraced the fact that, you know what, our issues are a bigger deal than somebody else's issues. We got a lot of work to do on ourselves. We got a lot of things that we got to work on, a lot of areas that we got to improve before we can start looking around and pointing the finger at somebody else. This reminder is something that's always kept us calibrated. It's always kept us focused as a church, is that we need to be people who always look inwardly before we ever look outwardly and judge somebody or condemn somebody or point a finger at somebody else. We have sins in our life. We all have. We've experienced sin in our life. We'll continue to experience sin in our life. We will continue to struggle in our life. We are no better than anybody else. If we are truly going to be a hospital of hope for hurting people, then we're going to have to understand that all of us are on a level playing field. And nobody is better than anybody. We are all fellow strugglers in this thing called life. And we all have sins that we will continue to struggle with the rest of our lives. There are just some sins that make us a little bit more uncomfortable, and we are so good at pointing out the sins that make us uncomfortable, all the while finding comfort in our own sin. And we got to deal with that as a church. We got to keep that in light. Here's what I believe we are today. Every one of us in this room, everybody watching this message, listening to this message later this week, here's what I tell you. Every one of us are either someone who has been rescued by God's great grace, or you are here today and you are in need of God's great grace. And if you're someone who's been rescued by the great grace of God, then you never, ever get over the fact that God's grace would rescue someone like you. And you know that you're dependent the rest of your life for the grace of God, for your sustainability as a person, as an individual, not just in this life, but beyond this life. One of the verses that have always steered us as a church is found in Romans chapter 3, verse 10, and it says this, that there is no one righteous, not even how many? Not even one. There's no one righteous. I'm not righteous. You're not righteous, right? There was only one, Jesus himself. This always keeps us focused that we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to have it all figured out. We're never going to have it all together. None of us. It should be something that keeps us in this healthy perspective of how we see people we pass every day. Someone we're sitting beside in church this morning, a hand that we shook, someone we saw this morning getting breakfast or pumping gas on the way here, that we see people the same way that we see ourselves. See, we've long said that we want to create a church. We believe that God called us to create a church where it's okay to not be okay and show up here. It's okay to not be okay. You came here today and your life isn't okay. That's okay. That's okay. We don't want you to ever believe that you got to fix your life before you come to a place like this. How heartbreaking is it to think there are people outside the four walls of the church in America, not just this church, but in America, that won't come into a place like this because there's the idea that I got to get my life together before I ever show up to a place like this. Isn't that so sad? Isn't it so heartbreaking to think there are people every single week who would love to come to a place like Hope Church, but there's this stereotype with followers of Jesus and Christians and churches and pastors and denominations that if I show up to a place, I'm going to be judged. And so we say at Hope Church, it's okay to not be okay. But it's our prayer that you wouldn't stay that way. Not because I have a desire to change you, because I can't change you. A denomination can't change you. People can't change you. Our prayer is that you would encounter Jesus and that Jesus would change you, that his grace would cover you, that he would meet you at your greatest point of need, that he would show you love and grace and forgiveness and mercy like you've never experienced in your life, and as a result, he would change you from the inside out. See, if we're going to be a church where sinners love to attend, if we're going to be a church where people like me and you are welcome, if we're going to be a church where your friends and your family members and your coworkers are willing to take a risk and show up to, there are some things that we're going to have to always remember and some things we're going to have to always put in practice. So when you came in today, you got a program in your seat. I want to encourage you to pull out your program. I want you to take some notes with us today. If you don't want to take notes, it'll all be on the screens for you as well. If you're at home or watch this in the app, it'll be on the screens for you as well. I want you to write this down. We have to be a church that loves and accepts sinners. We have to be a church that loves and accepts sinners. We have to be a church that loves and accepts sinners. You say, well, why, Tad? Why do we have to be that church? Well, I'm so glad you asked, because I have 3 reasons today why we have to be a church that loves and accepts sinners. First thing is just write this down. Because Jesus loved and accepted sinners. Why do we need to be a church that loves and accepts sinners? Because Jesus loved and accepted sinners. Now, if you read that, you say, well, Tad, that's past tense. He says loved and accepted as if it was in the past. Well, we believe Jesus is our model. He's our example. And so, yes, we want to look at his life here on earth. We want to see how he loved and accepted people, but it's also present tense. He didn't just once love and accepted people. He still loves and accepts sinners like you and me. Look what happens here in Luke chapter 5, verse 27 through 32. It says, after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. Follow me, Jesus said to him. And Levi got up and left everything and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance, right? And so during this day, you had the uber religious, you had the uber righteous, and they're looking at Jesus and they're saying, Jesus, if you're truly the Son of God, then why would you not be in the temples and the synagogues? Why would you not just be hanging out in church every week with all the self-righteous people like us? Why would you ever be out with the sinners and the tax collectors? Now, if you follow through the New Testament, you see there's always this kind of this drawn to this idea of these tax collectors being the worst of sinners. And Jesus uses tax collectors a lot in his illustrations. You say, why is that? Because during this day, tax collectors were considered the lowest of low, the worst of all sinners. I mean, they were below prostitutes and drug dealers. I mean, this was like the worst of the worst of the worst. You say, why? Because during this day, the Jews were under oppression to the Romans. And the Romans were robbing and stealing from the people. And so guys like Levi were Jewish people who had basically traded sides and had gone over to the Roman side, and they were robbing from their own people. And people hated them. And so in people's minds, this was like the worst of all sinners. And I want you for just a moment, as you think about what Jesus is saying, put in your head right now what you believe to be the worst of all sinners, because everybody in this room has kind of a standard, right? Like, these people are okay, but like that person right there, that person who's committed murder, or that person who's a rapist, or that person who's a homosexual, or that person who's had an abortion, that person, they're like the worst of all sinners, because I don't care who you are. Everybody in this room, that person who's walked through a divorce, that person who's walked through an affair, you all have this standard we all do that we measure ourselves by, and we say, well, if I'm not like them, those dirty people, see, I'm kind of better than that person, right? Those sins that make me uncomfortable, that I haven't struggled with, I'm comfortable in my sin, but I'm uncomfortable in someone else's sin. And Jesus has this reminder. He says, listen, I didn't come for those so-called righteous people who go to church every week and check boxes and believe they're better than everybody else because of their religious activity. I've come for the sinners. Look what he says in Luke chapter 15, verse 1 and 2. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners, how dare he? And he eats meals with them. Can you believe this guy? He actually hangs out with sinners. Can you believe this? All throughout the scriptures, Jesus gets this title from the religious as friend of sinners. Now they meant it as a shot against Jesus. They meant it to kind of bring him down. Like he's really the Messiah, the chosen one, the one who's come to rescue humanity from its sins. Then how dare he be a friend of sinners? But you know what I love about Jesus? Jesus carried it with a badge of honor. He carried it not in pride, in some bad, prideful way, as like, that's exactly what I've come for. This is exactly my heart's mission. See, I believe as a church, instead of us being a place where sinners run away from, I just believe that if we're going to call ourselves followers of Jesus, that we should be perfectly comfortable with the same title. Hope Church, friend of sinners. Hope Church, a place where sinners are welcome. Hope Church, a place where sinners haven't forgotten that they'll always be sinners and they welcome and love and embrace other sinners, right? I mean, wouldn't it be great if that was our reputation? And here's what I love about our church, is that it's been our reputation, but we'll have to constantly fight and make sure as a church that we continue to make sure that's what we're known for. I told you guys before, years ago, I had a pastor in town who sent me a really nasty email, and at the bottom he took a shot and he said, oh, man, you want to be known as the church where all the sinners go? And I wrote back, absolutely. Absolutely. I would love that to be the title, because a sinner shows up every week in me, just like a sinner shows up every week in your church like you. And the pride that you just showed me and sent him in the email shows the sin that you're dealing with, that you've become comfortable with. And since we get to a place so often when we become comfortable in our own sin and we become uncomfortable with other people's sins, we can't ever allow ourselves to create a place in our atmosphere or have a vision and mission that only allows certain people in and wards off other people. See, I love this fact about this church, is that regardless of your race, regardless of your political views, regardless of your sexual preference, regardless of your denominational upbringing, regardless of your background or affiliation, regardless of your past or present circumstances, this is a place where you can be loved and accepted and met with grace and mercy and love. A place where you can begin your journey no matter how messy it is towards Jesus. Because here's what I want you to know. Our journey towards Jesus for every single one of us, it's messy. Your journey is messy too. My journey is messy. All of our journeys have been messy. We all got baggage. We all got bruises. We all got scrapes. We got hurts. We got pains. We got sins that we've struggled with. This is a place where you can come and we can fail together. In your worst moment, your biggest failure, we can struggle through it together. A place where you can find hope and healing together. A place where you can grow together. A place where you truly can come that's free of judgment or condemnation. I work out at Planet Fitness sometimes. You know what they're saying is, it's a judgment-free zone. That should be the church's title. It shouldn't have been the gym's title. It should have been the church's title. It should be a place where you can come and feel free of judgment, free of condemnation. What I love about this church is that we've been a church that has fought off gossip and slander and condemnation and judgment. We've run people off. This isn't going to be a place where you're going to look at somebody else and judge them on the circumstances. And let me just tell you something. As soon as I start preaching a message about love and acceptance and grace, the uber religious build up a wall and they get this hard heart and they get real pious and self-righteous and they start saying, well, wait a second. I thought our mission as followers of Jesus was to point people to truth and to point out the sins of others. Right? I thought that was our mission, is that we got to stand up for what's right and we got to defend truth. And I say, you're absolutely right. We are called as followers of Jesus to defend truth, to stand up for what is right. As long as you and I can do it without pride, without arrogance, without self-righteousness, without judgment or condemnation, as long as you and I can point someone to truth with the same grace and love and mercy and forgiveness and acceptance that Jesus showed to every single one of us, then you are exactly 100% right. We are called to defend truth and love and grace, a grace that covers us throughout our entire lives and throughout our entire eternity. A grace that forgives and forgives and forgives and forgives. A grace that has never, ever once given up on you. I'm not once saying that we should glaze over sin. and just become tolerant of sin. I'm not giving us a free pass, but I don't believe our job as followers of Jesus is to sit in the cheap seats and to point out people's faults and sins and judge people. I believe our mission as followers of Jesus is to point people to the hope and the grace and the love and the forgiveness of Jesus, and then shut up and let him do what only he can do, which is change hearts to begin with. Too many churches, too many pastors, too many denominations have been sitting around trying to change people, trying to distance ourselves from people. We follow someone who came, who was willing to get his hands dirty, who was willing to carry the label, friend of sinners, and didn't care. Why should the church be a place that's trying to separate itself from the world? I'm not saying we should be so impacted by the world that we don't stand for truth, but you know what? The world should feel they should come here any day of the week and feel love and acceptance no matter what. No matter what. Tad, it sounds like tolerance to me. We should be the most tolerant group of people on the face of the planet. We should love people at their greatest point of need. We should love people and love people and love people straight towards the love and acceptance of Jesus. Thank God somebody loved and accepted me in my journey of my life. Thank God that somebody didn't size me up and push me away. Thank God someone didn't look at my sin, become uncomfortable with it, and say, you can't be at a place like this. You can't come to a place like this. Thank God there were people in my life who picked me up in my worst moment and brought me to the hope of Jesus. We all need to be a church like that. People need that in their life. Listen, we will always have to fight, and I believe we've done a great job as a church to be the symbol of hope in our community. A place where people can come when they have more questions than answers. A place where people can go when their life doesn't turn out to be all that they expected for it to be. A place where people can come in the midst of their greatest failures. A place where people can be met with love and hope and grace. A place where we can continue to have a reputation of hope for the hurting, hope for those that need healing in this community. And I hope and pray that we never lose it. As a church, our mission is to follow Jesus. I'm proud that we don't back down as a church when we are called the place where sinners go. I carry it as a pastor as a badge of honor because we are all sinners. We're all in pursuit of Jesus who saves sinners like you and I. Luke 19:10 says this, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. The lost. Like he says, that's his mission, to seek and save the lost. If you're not a follower of Jesus, spiritually speaking, the scriptures say that you and I are spiritually lost. Prior to having a relationship with Jesus, we're kind of floundering through life. We don't know where to go. We don't know where to turn. Here's what I know. Unless you're just a jerk, when somebody's lost and they come to you and they ask for directions, you don't look at them and say, you stupid idiot, how did you get lost? You flipping moron, why are you in this situation? You know what you do? If you know where the directions and where someone's heading, you just point them from point A to point B. Hey, I know where you're going, and here's how you get there, right? That should be our responsibility as followers of Jesus. I'm not here to judge why you're so lost. I'm not here to judge how you've gotten lost in this journey, but let me tell you something. I've been found, and my responsibility is to make sure that you're found as well. I mean, we carry it as a value at this church that found people find people, right? I've been found by Jesus, and my life's mission is to make sure that somebody else will be found by Jesus as well. It has been our desire since we started this church in this community that we would be a beacon of hope and love and acceptance and grace in this community. And this is what will position us as a church to continue to be friends of sinners. We have to be a church that loves and accepts sinners. Why? Because we are all sinners that have been loved and accepted by Jesus. All of us. Why do we have to be a church that loves and accepts sinners? Because we have all been loved and accepted, and we are all sinners. I keep this verse on a Post-it note on my computer monitor, and it serves as a daily reminder to me. It's one of my favorite verses in Scripture, and it may seem odd to you as one of my favorite verses, but I love it. It's written in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, and it says this. Here's a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. I keep it right there every day. It serves as a reminder to me. This verse right here was penned by the Apostle Paul. If you didn't go to church, many of you know him as St. Paul, right? St. Paul. Many cathedrals and churches are named after the great St. Paul. In fact, many of us are here today because of the Apostle Paul, probably the greatest follower of Jesus to have ever lived. But prior to Paul becoming a follower of Jesus, Paul was actually a really awful person. He killed followers of Jesus. He martyred followers of Jesus. And Paul, in his ministry, he never forgot that he was the worst of all sinners. I would love sometimes to just have a conversation with Paul because I feel like, I said this before, that he stole my title, right? I feel like that's my title, right? That's my personal title. I'm the chief of all sinners. I'm the worst of all sinners. Me, that's my title. But you know what? This kept Paul calibrated. It kept him focused. It was a constant reminder that drove his ministry forward that, you know what? I'm never better than anyone else. I'm a sinner who didn't deserve grace, who because of the grace of God was given this unmerited, undeserving grace of God, and I've never forgotten, and it's what compelled Paul to move forward with love and grace in the way that he did. See, we have to have an accurate perspective of ourselves. We need a daily dose of a reminder of the sinner that we once were, that we are, and the one that we will continue to be throughout our lives. See, until you and I see ourselves as someone that are in need of being rescued, then you will never accept the fact that somebody left heaven and came to earth to rescue you. Until you ever get to a place of seeing how desperate you are. See, some of us grew up in church. We grew up around the things of God. We've always believed we're a little better than everybody else because we've always had a little bit of religion in us. And see, the problem with that, growing up in the South, is some of us have never seen the fact that we are sinners who need the grace of Jesus. That church doesn't do it for us, and mama's faith didn't do it for us, and grandma's faith didn't do it for us, that we have to have a faith of our own. We have to have an acceptance of the grace of Jesus for ourselves. A place where you got to in your life when you knew that I cannot move forward without the grace of Jesus in my life. See, we cannot allow ourselves to ever become blinded by religious pride. We can't ever allow self-righteousness to ever set into our lives. Because the moment that you and I forget about the forgiveness and grace that we've been shown is the moment that we no longer accurately represent Jesus to others. People don't need any longer in our community or our world or on social media another inaccurate representation of Jesus. They need the real thing. They need to see it in us. See, I can't give grace away until I've received grace in my own life. And once I received it, I can't keep it to myself. I'm compelled to give it to someone else. If you aren't living in grace, and let me tell you something, then most likely I'll say this boldly, you have never actually received the grace of Jesus in your own life. If you can't see people through the lens of grace, then you have never seen through the lens of grace of which Jesus loved you enough to meet you at your greatest point of need. Receiving grace, I believe, is a prerequisite to being a friend of sinners. See, the reason why I believe churches and denominations and pastors and Christians have struggled with this for so long is because I've struggled with it. You know why? Because we have this tendency to make Jesus into our own image. You know that? So we think a certain way, and we believe, well, Jesus was a human being, and so Jesus thinks the way that we think. Right? We see that Jesus was fully human, but Jesus was also fully God. And we have this idea that Jesus sees people the way that we see people. And the problem with that is that Jesus doesn't see people the way we see people at all. Now, if we want to get honest, we could get really honest because we could all speak about this. It doesn't matter what race or background you are. Here's what I would know, that all of us have seen life at some point through the lens of prejudice. We've seen people by their skin color. We've summed them up. We've seen people by their socioeconomic background. We've seen people where they live or what they drive or what they wear, where they work. We looked at somebody because of their political views, and we thought, I'm right and you're wrong. I'm right and you're wrong. And since I'm right and I'm a follower of Jesus, Jesus thinks I'm right and you're wrong as well. And this is what we think, right? And so we see everything through this lens, right? And so there are people that we hate in our culture. We would never use that word, but let's be honest. We get on social media and we cringe about what they write. We cringe about what they post. We turn on the news and we hate a certain group of people, a certain political background, a certain pundit or whatever it is. We hate people. We hate them. We hate them. And the problem is that we think Jesus hates them as well. And Jesus doesn't hate anybody. He doesn't see people in life the way that we see life. He doesn't see others the way that we see others. He doesn't judge anyone based on their political views or their race or their socioeconomic class or even their sexual preference. You know what he sees? People that need grace and love and mercy. People that need to experience forgiveness and people that need to be exposed to his truth, not your and our version of truth. Because some of us in this room have a misguided interpretation of what truth looks like. People need to experience real truth. finding a real relationship with a real God. If we turn off the news and we turn off social media for just a few moments, you know what I would discover? Is that many of us would see our world differently. In fact, I'd encourage some of you, the best, most spiritual act you can make today is to stop watching the news and turn off social media. Because you know what happens when we see all the differences in people? When you see someone's views and you see the differences, you stop seeing someone for who they are. You stop seeing someone who's in need. You stop seeing the rescue that they need in their life. And you just see all the differences that divide us and separate us. God hasn't called for us to be separated from everybody. God's called for us to show his love and grace to everyone that we come in contact with. You say, but Tad, I thought Jesus hated sin. And I thought that was his responsibility. I thought that he hated sin. I thought as a church and Christians, we're supposed to hate sin. Yeah. You know what Jesus hates? He hates what sin does to people. He hates what sin causes. Sin has a damaging effect. You know this. It splinters. It destroys. It leaves you with scars and baggage and emptiness. It leads you to a life of feeling hopeless, purposeless. It leads you to a life of having way more questions than answers. The greatest thing that sin does, though, is it drives a wedge between us and God. It keeps us from having a relationship with God. That's the factor of sin in our life, is that it draws a wedge between us and a holy, righteous God, and it keeps us from being in a relationship with God. It causes emptiness and addictions and so many things. When we're living in sin, we've never experienced the grace of Jesus. When we never experienced the grace of Jesus, then we can't be rescued into a relationship with God. Here's what I know about God. God loved us so much that he didn't want that. So he sent Jesus to this earth to rescue us from drifting further and further away from God. Jesus left heaven and came to earth to close the gap. So he hates what sin does, but he never hates the sinner. Understand that ever. He hates sin so much that he gave up his life to forgive you of the consequences of every sin you and I and anyone in the world has ever committed. That, in its very essence, is the complete opposite of anything hateful ever. Jesus, in his nature, is love. Everything about him spilled over into love and grace and mercy and acceptance and forgiveness, a love that none of us deserve. If you've ever felt hatred because of a sin in your life, from a church, from a follower of Jesus, from a pastor, then I can promise you that it was a misrepresentation of Jesus himself. See, if I constantly remind myself of who I was and who I still am, and admit that I will still struggle the rest of my life, then it will always keep my heart in alignment with his heart. We need this healthy dose of reminder. You say, Tad, why do we do a series like this? Well, I need to come to church and hear that I'm a sinner. Why do I need this reminder? Because here's what I know. I grew up, I told you, as a church kid. I've been around church my whole life. I've been in Alamance County for the last 12 years, pastoring here for the last 11 years. You know what I know? There is this tendency that we will all struggle to at some point get a little self-righteous with ourselves. To start looking around and judging our sin based on somebody else's sin. And if we're not careful, let me tell you exactly what can happen in our life. It plays out in Scripture, Luke chapter 18, verses 10 through 12. It says, 2 men went up to a temple to pray, one a Pharisee, an uber-religious man, and one a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I'm not like the other people, you know, the robbers, the evildoers, the homosexuals, the adulterers, the liberals, the Democrats, the abortionists, or even like this tax collector. Thank God. I'm so much better than all of them. I fast twice a week. I go to church 1.4 times a month. I tithe occasionally. I'm even in one of those crazy groups that meet throughout the week. Look how better I am than everyone else. I got on social media today. I saw she didn't come to church. I'm so much spiritual than she is. That's what we do, right? Here you have this religious man. He's gone up to heaven. He lifts his head up in pride and self-righteousness. Look at my life. I'm so much better than him. So much better than the other sinners. And whether we've ever actually prayed out loud like that or not, we've all dealt with it. I don't care who you are. and we'll all continue to deal with it. This is why we need this healthy dose of a reminder, the love and acceptance that Jesus has shown to every single one of us. See, this first week of this series is to get our hearts in alignment, tear down some big walls, step on some sacred cows, shake us loose a little bit, get our hearts and our souls and our minds in alignment for what God has, not just for us, but for others as well. If I want to be someone who's a friend of sinners, I got to have to remember that Jesus himself loved and accepted a sinner like me. Last thing is this. We have to be a church that loves and accepts sinners. Why? Because we are committed to do whatever it takes to reach people that are far from God. It's the vision that drives this church forward. Jesus says that it's our job to never stop looking for people who need a relationship with Jesus, to never stop searching for people that are far from God. I will say this honestly. There are most likely people in this room who have been coming to church longer than I've been alive, who are as far from God as the person who's never graced the doorsteps of church their entire life. It's just the reality. And God has called us to this community to reach people who've been going to church their whole life, who think they have a relationship with God, and people who have never even known they were in need of a relationship with God. We have this responsibility of doing whatever it takes by whatever means necessary to reach someone with the life-changing message of Jesus. And we can never stop with that mission. Because, see, Jesus, the perfect one, never stops searching for imperfect people like us. Here's what I know. When you seek after imperfect people, then you're going to reach imperfect people. Did you realize that? You know what I know about this church? It's full of imperfect people. We've said this before. If you believe you're perfect, then get out. Because we're going to screw your life up. Because this church is full of jacked up people because we were all sinners. None of us are righteous. Not even one of us. Not even one of us. And if we are called to be a hospital of hope for hurting people, then every once in a while, we're going to have to put on our custodian uniform and help someone clean up the mess of their life. We shouldn't be taken back because someone's life is messy. Oh, I can't believe that happened in church. I can't believe they're walking through that. We shouldn't be taken back when people far from God act like people far from God. Why does it shock us? Why does it surprise us? Instead of judgment, you know what our first thought should be? Grace. They've never been exposed to truth. And my mission is to love them to the truth of Jesus. Because the truth of Jesus is what sets you free. Free, that's the mission. That's the heart. Here's what I know is that somebody loved you enough to help you clean up your mess. And if you can't love someone else enough to help clean up their mess, then maybe you've never really experienced that love to begin with. Luke 18, verse 13 through 14 is the second part of that verse, and it says this, "But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but he beat his breast and said, 'God, have mercy on me, a sinner.'" Jesus says this in verse 14, "I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted." I don't know your story. I don't know who you're sitting beside. I don't know their story. I know my story. I know there was a time in my life when I was so incredibly far from God that I had lost all hope in this life and any hope of ever achieving anything in this life. I had so much scars and baggage. So many people had walked away from me, given up on me, and rightfully so. I didn't deserve anybody's trust, anyone's faith. At the lowest point of my life, I was partying really heavy every single night, and maybe you heard me share my testimony before. I'd done what I'd done on many occasions and mixed way too much drugs and way too much alcohol and ended up in the hospital getting my stomach pumped. And I was like one of the lowest points, one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I didn't want my parents to find out. I was just terrified of who would know. And I remember coming home and staying at my friend's house. And I've never been suicidal. I've never contemplated taking my life. But I remember crying out to God. The only person I could think to turn to in my lowest moment was God. I don't know why. Even in my thoughts, I thought there's no way that God's going to accept me. There's no way that God's going to love me. I've done too much. And we could go blow for blow. I mean, we could sit here all day long. We could exchange blows all day long. I could tell you all the things that I've done, all places that you've been. It's a similar story. It's just relevant to the situation, relative to the person. I just cried out to God. I just said, God, if this is all that my life will ever amount to, then I just want to die. You ever been to a place like that? Like, I just don't even want to live anymore. Like I didn't contemplate doing anything with myself, but I just thought, God, this is it. I don't want to live anymore. I said, but God, if you have something for my life, I'm willing to do anything other than be where I am right now. And I'm not going to try to sell you some super spiritual conversation, just try to give you some pastor story, but I would tell you, in that moment, more than any moment in my life, I felt the loving, graceful arms of God meet me at my greatest point of need. I didn't feel arms of a God come in and poke me in my chest and say, you worthless sinner, you're exactly where you should be. All these things have led you to this place, and this is all the sum total of all your decisions and results. You should be right here, you worthless sinner. I never felt that. I felt love and acceptance and grace. I love to tell you the moment that I walked out of that bed and out of my friend's house, that it was the easiest journey of my life and it had no obstacles or hardships or I didn't fall or sin any longer. That would be a lie. But it began my journey towards Jesus. It was messy. Man, I would get on the wagon and I'll fall off the wagon. I'd get back on the wagon, I'd fall off the wagon. But I started noticing that there was distance between the time that I last fell off the wagon. I started noticing when I did fall off the wagon, there was something broken inside of me that quickly wanted to restore it back to God. So then my life began to change. I began to get overwhelmed by the grace and love and forgiveness of Jesus. It was in that moment that I know that Jesus rescued me with his grace. See, every one of us in this room, we've either been rescued in some form, some way by the grace of Jesus, or we are here today and we need to be rescued by the grace of Jesus. But if you've been rescued, you never, ever get over the rescue of grace that you've received. So we say found people, but maybe we say today that rescue people rescue people. That's what you do. In a rescue situation, the same thing as someone getting lost, you don't stop and say, hey, idiot, you're drowning. You stupid moron. You shouldn't swim that far out into the ocean. You're an idiot. Is that what you do? No, you have this responsibility to get a life raft and to run out into the deep waters and get them a raft and get them back to the shore and get safety and security to show them the grace and mercy that you've been shown. And so we lead with this grace and mercy. We lead with hope. We lead with forgiveness and acceptance. We meet people right where they are. We are called as followers of Jesus to be ambassadors of Christ. You know what an ambassador is? There's somebody who represents our country to another foreign leader or another foreign person. They represent our president to someone else. When they speak with the words and the power and authority of our president at the highest level. We've been called the same thing as followers of Jesus. When we speak, we are speaking with the authority of Jesus, with the grace of Jesus. Are our words with the grace and forgiveness and hope of Jesus? Or is it with the condemnation and judgment that doesn't represent him? Jesus needs us today to be ambassadors of hope, to be ambassadors of grace. It's easy to take pot shots from a distance or a computer or from behind your cell phone. It's really difficult to get face-to-face with someone and judge them. It really is. Because you know what happens when you sit down with somebody? Your heart starts to break for them. And you begin to have grace for someone's situation because you begin to understand why they think the way that they think. And you begin to see the circumstances of what led them to the place that they're at. And your heart starts to beat for the same things that make your Savior's heart beat. And it changes you. If you're here today and maybe your life's a mess, I don't think it's by chance you came to Hope Church today. There are people here today and they're disguised in custodian costumes, but they just say, "We are Hope" shirts on the front of them. And they would love today to come alongside of you and to help clean up the mess of your life. They're not caught off guard. Many of them have gone through all the same things that you're going through right now, have experienced all the same hurts and baggage and pains that you've gone through, and they would love to show you how God took their mess and turned it into something that they never thought possible. If God did that for me and he did that for them, he can do it for you as well. I want you to experience today the grace of a God who has never once given up on you, who can take your darkest failure and turn it into the brightest moment of your life. Whatever it is today, wherever you are today, I want you to know God loves you. God loves you so much that because of Jesus, through a relationship with Jesus, you can be forgiven of every sin that you have ever committed, that you will ever commit on the face of the earth, because Jesus' grace covered all of it. In him today, through him today, you can have the power to overcome any sin you struggle with your whole life. It is found in him and him alone, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Let's pray together. God, today we are thankful that you're a God who never has once given up on us. You're a God who has pursued us with grace and hope and love and forgiveness. And God, we are called as your followers to be people who give that grace and hope and love to others. God, may we be challenged today, if we are your followers, to not be people who lead with judgment or condemnation, people who can be people of grace and hope and love, who can point people to you, Jesus, who represent you, who speak on behalf of you, who allow the words that come out of our mouth to be uplifting and building and edifying, that people may know that you're in us just by the words, by our posture, by what we post on social media, by the people that we choose to distance ourselves from. May the world see something different in us. All willingness to love and accept people right where they are. If you're here today and you've never given your heart and life to Jesus, today's the day, now's the moment. Not to just know about him, have a relationship with him. If that's you today, just cry out to God today and say, God, today I received your gift of grace and mercy that was poured on a cross through your son Jesus. A grace that covered every sin that I've ever committed in this life. Thank you for your gift of grace and mercy and forgiveness. The truth is I am a sinner who's in need of a rescue. And you came to be my rescuer, my savior, and my Lord. Today I put my faith and trust in you. Today I want to begin a relationship with you, following you. I don't even know where to begin. Show me what step to take. Thank you for your mission. Thank you for your power. God, thank you for this church. Thank you for the heart of this church. God, may we continue to be a church that is a hospital of hope for those that are hurting and in need. In Christ Jesus' name, amen.